Great. So welcome again, everyone. My name is Nir. I'm Director of Publishing in Supersonic Studios. I'm super excited to be here. Today we're going to speak about the hyper-casual market in 2023. We're going to speak about the changes that we have been through over the past 2 years. So let's start. I'm super excited. We're going to talk about the market trends, changes. We're going to discuss mainly how we're going to deal with those changes and how can we tackle it in order to keep growing and keep our business healthy during 2023. And I'm going to try and focus on the right trends and the right spots with the new environment that we are experiencing. Cool. So starting from the market trend, so what we can see here is basically a graph of the eCPM, which means the revenue we're getting for each 1,000 impressions, or more simple, how much revenue we're getting for each ad impression that we're showing in our hyper-casual games. So basically what we can see here in terms of the trend is that over 2021, we saw a tremendous increase in eCPM, which means very good news. We're making much more revenue for each ad impressions that we're showing, which converts basically into higher LTV for the same ad impressions, same in-game metrics, and for the same game. Then over 2022, for many reasons I'm gonna share in a few slides, such as a financial crisis, we experienced a very big downtrend in eCPM, which did the opposite. We saw a downtrend in LTV and downtrend in the eCPMs on the monetization side. And what we can see basically that over the past few months, we're pretty stable on the numbers that we used to see before 2021. And it basically means that we went back to the numbers of eCPMs and the revenue that we're making for each ad impressions that we used to see before the explosion in 2021. Another interesting insight to look into is basically the graph of the S&P 500 stock market, which basically behaves pretty much the same, which makes sense. And what we do see is that over the past months, obviously we see a very nice and positive trend on the S&P 500 stock market, which so far seems like having a good correlation for the eCPM trend, meaning that we're expecting that trend to be in a positive direction, so that we'll see higher eCPMs, higher LTV, and basically we'll see the hyper-casual and the ad industry increasing and having a positive trend. So why basically we saw such a big downtrend in the market? Basically because there's two sides of the coins. One is the monetization, and the second one is basically the UA, eCPM and CPIs trend. What we can see here is a graph from Supersonic, internal Facebook Android test. And what we do see comparing to the monetization eCPM trend, that the UA side also increased significantly over 2021 and also had a decline trend over 2022. The thing is that it didn't decrease as much as the monetization eCPM did, and therefore basically the formula of the monetization versus the eCPM got narrow, and we'll speak about the effect and the impact of it in the next slide. So on the right side, we can basically see a snapshot during the past 3 years, from May 2021 to May 2023. What we can see is that I took screenshots of the top charts of games from Data AI. And what we can see is that over May 23, we had 11 hyper-casual games out of 15 top charts games, which were hyper-casual games. Then 1 year after, in 2022, we saw only 7. And this year, in May, we only saw 1. So first of all, the main reasons for that were the trends that we saw with the eCPM trend, both on the monetization and the user acquisition side, which affected by many things. The general and the most important reasons for that was post-COVID, was the financial crisis, and basically which creates struggling in the market, which convert into less hyper-casual games in the top charts, which also affect the supply. So if we were used to buy users for hyper-casual games from different hyper-casual games, today we have less supply. And the last thing is that we're seeing more and more hybrid games behavior, which behaves differently than the classic high-scale, low LTV hyper-casual games, which means that you don't need to be on the top 10 in order to generate significant revenues and profits. And I'm gonna dive into it in the next couple of slides. So, in simple words, what does it mean? It means that the CPI inflation, together with the monetization eCPM downtrend, narrowed the profitability formula of the high-scale, low LTV games, which is the classic, super marketable, hyper-casual games, such as Chatmaster. So it basically means that those type of games which represent part of the hyper-casual subgenre and part of the hyper-casual type of games, having a lower profitability formula than what it used to be with the strong eCPM monetization trends and the lower CPIs or UA eCPMs. To summarize, basically what we can see is that it's still here, the hyper-casual games. We can still see very strong hits, classic hyper-casual games, mostly monetized with interstitials, very low CPIs on the UA side. It's just harder to find them, and we're seeing less of them. I think that a great example, which we recently launched, is our last hit game, Slow Mo Run, which is a classic hyper-casual game, it's very marketable, a classic hyper-casual engagement metrics, mostly monetized with interstitials, and it's doing amazingly, which help us to be confident that the classic hyper-casual games are here to stay. It's just harder to find them. The second thing is basically that we see that even for those type of games, the simple classic hyper-casual games, we need to have higher retention, higher playtime, higher APAPU in order to get for the same LTV that we need and that we used to see 2 years ago. We do see that the eCPM trend is recovering, but on the other side of the quality demand, which is as a result of competition and as a result of the natural progress and evolvement of every type of product. So this is something that, although we do see and expect to see recovery on the eCPM trend, which means that we'll see higher LTV for the same ad impressions and for the same in-game metrics, we do know and expect the quality demand to keep the same trend and to keep, and users will want to see better and better products, which is something that is pretty natural. So what's next and how can we deal with those changes? How can we tackle it? How can we recognize different trends or specific trends and elements that we can add or change in those classic hyper-casual games or in different subgenres in order to keep up with the pace and keep growing our businesses and launch amazing games? Cool. So basically we recognize two main elements, which is a deeper experience for users, which convert into basically more quality products and games, longer retention, etc. And the second thing is trying to remove basically the formula that we're monetizing mainly with interstitials to more RV and less interstitials. I will explain why and how in a few slides. And I think that something which is very important to say is that it's not hybrid only. It's even for the most marketable 100% interstitial based hyper-casual game. It's also the right thing to consider and to approach with those type of games. So hybrid is definitely an amazing approach and subgenre that we can tackle and we can use, but not only. I will try to explain and give some examples in the next few slides. So this is basically the four main elements that we're looking into when we are going to think, ideate, and develop and hyper-casual games. And in order to get to the point that we are showing more RVs and less interstitials in order to boost the LTV and to get basically a higher LTV, I wanted to focus on two main points. So if I'm starting for point one, high scale, low CPIs is basically the core of our business. This is something that we should aim for, even if it's a classic hyper-casual game or a hybrid game. This is the core element that we should think, ideate, and plan. We're creating a game. This is something that we don't want to change. The second thing is that we need to have strong core mechanics. If we're looking at classic hyper-casual games with very low CPIs, it's not necessarily need to be the case, because we can have a very positive formula between ratio between the LTV and the CPI, even if we don't have very, very strong core mechanic, but we do have very, very low CPI. If we want to create games with higher LTV and we want to create games with long-term retention, we do need to have and to lay on strong core mechanics in order to create a deeper gameplay experience, and then moving to more complicated and complex monetization strategy with more rewarded videos and in-app purchases. So solid core mechanic to create deeper experience is something that we must keep in mind when we're moving to approach the next prototype and to ideate our next game. The third thing, which basically I'm going to dive into this slide, is how to create that deeper game loop, and why do we need to create that deeper game loop. And lastly, how we're taking that deeper game loop, more in engagement, and converting it into rewarded videos and in-app purchases monetization. The main reason that we want to do it is obviously two main reasons. The first one is that simply we are getting 2 to 3 times higher revenue for each RV impressions comparing to interstitial impression. And the second thing is that rewarded videos are proven to increase engagement comparing to interstitial, which is hurting the experience and the engagement of the users, obviously. So how can we create basically the RV motivation? I think that the first thing is to make sure that we have a long-term goal, because in order to show and to create this RV engagement, RV motivation, we need to have users for longer time. We can't monetize users with rewarded videos if they're staying in the game for 2 days. So obviously we need to create some deeper experience, long term retention, so users will stay in the game even after day 7 and even after day 14, which is quite unique for classic hyper-casual games. The second thing is that we need to create challenge and or skill. This is something that is super, super important in order to create a reason for users to watch rewarded video, because unlike classic hyper-casual game, which is fun-oriented almost only, here we need to create a reason and specific points for users to engage with rewarded videos. And challenge and skill is, I would say, the main aspects and the main elements that we need to create in our games in order to get there. The third thing is basically to have a meaningful economy, which basically means that we need to focus and to create the right experience with the right balance and the right difficulty curve in all aspects in order to make the user feel that this is the solution. Rewarded video in a purchase is a great solution for him to progress in the game or to get more valuable products in the game. So the economy needs to be much more sophisticated and planned in advance. The next thing is basically progression and meta, and this is one of the main aspects that will basically will make users stay in the game for the long term. It's more related for gameplay, but it's also something great that we can monetize and keep as part of the economy of the game. And lastly, basically how we actually gonna monetize and how we're planning to implement those rewarded videos and in-app purchases monetization strategy inside the game. I wanted to give an example of a classic hyper-casual heat game that we published 2 years ago, which is Ropeman Run. So if we're looking at Ropeman Run on all of the aspects that I just stated in terms of the game loop, what we can see is basically that we have a pretty simple goal, which is finishing the level. Then we need to collect gems, and what we're going to do with those gems is, which is the meta, is basically buying skins. So basically this game is mainly monetized with interstitials because the meta and the goal of the game is mainly cosmetics. So it's something that is not engaging enough and not important enough and not deep enough in order to create a real motivation and a reason for users to pay and to buy in-app purchases or to even watch RV. The main RV placements are doubling your coins or revive or anything like that. But in general, the game didn't build for a great challenge or skill based. It's built for all of the users to create pure fun and therefore can be monetized mainly with interstitials. So although it's an amazing game and it did and still doing pretty well, this is something that is not enough today in order to compensate with the changes that I just presented. And what do we need to do in this type of game is think how can we create deeper experience, longer retention, and change the monetization to more rewarded videos, in-app purchases, and less interstitials in order to help with both the engagement and the LTV improvements. So what can we do and how do we need to basically approach those type of games, or any type of game basically that we want to have higher LTV, longer engagement? So basically it's creating a deeper game loop, and this is something that is super important to think even before we're starting to develop the game. So what we can basically see here is the main elements of, obviously it's changes between each type of game, but we need to start from the main goal. What is the main goal of our game? How do we gather? What action are we doing in order to gather? We can fight, we can run, we can solve. So it's kind of a good fit for any type of gameplay. Then we're getting the reward and we're evolve and we need to progress. This is basically the core game loop that we need to think when we're approaching a classic hyper-casual game or an hybrid game. And we need to plan and to give attention to each part of it because it will be the main reason and connection to rewarded videos and in-app purchases monetization, which this is basically the foundations for that monetization strategy. Something super important to keep in mind and basically to keep as the main methodology is three main elements that I wanted to focus today. The first one is ideation, and basically how do we need to approach to a new game and how can we think of all of those aspects, because when we're creating a game and we already build a game with great metrics for the D7 or even further, it's something that if we want now to create the RV and in-app purchases monetization, it might be too late and we'll need to change the game completely in order to create those motivation. I will try to share an example of two cases that present that problem. So ideation would be the first part I'm gonna focus on and second thing is testing. How can we test the selling points and the engagement points that we plan that users will engage with rewarded videos and in-app purchases in order to make sure that we're creating the right experience and the right selling points on the right time and the economy and everything is perfectly balanced. And the last thing is benchmarking. This is kind of a new benchmarks and aspects for classic hyper-casual games. So it's super important as we use to benchmark retention, CPI, playtime. This is also something very important to benchmark and to make sure that we are reaching those benchmarks in order to meet the goals and successfully publish the game. Simple example of a classic hyper-casual game with low CPI and a very simple core gameplay of car racing competition with tap and hold controls, mechanics. So I wanted to share how basically it's the right approach and a good example of how to create deeper experience with classic, simple, low CPI gameplay. So I wanted to share three examples. The first one on the left is challenge. So if it was a classic hyper-casual game that we wanted to create pure fun and to create the highest output to show the highest amount of interstitials, probably we wouldn't need to create a lot of challenge because for some users it also creates frustration. But as we said before, if we want to create a real reason and the motivation for users to watch RV, we need to create those specific points of near miss and the feel of that if I failed now, I have something to do in order to progress faster and win the next race or the next battle. So challenge is something that we need to keep in mind and to plan in each and every level. So it's part of the level design, basically. So this is kind of the foundations. The second GIF in the middle is basically how can we create a meaningful economy and upgrade system, which is not only cosmetic. I'm not just clicking on a UI button which creates kind of an effect around my car and I feel that I upgraded my car. It's a real upgrade system that affect the gameplay. So it really feels like I do have a reason to pay for it or I do have a reason to fight for it. So it's something that is super crucial in order to create the RV motivation and so users will feel it is meaningful and real. And the last thing is basically how to create those specific moments that we can monetize, decision making for so we can see here assembling mechanic and gameplay, which basically I can upgrade my wheels to have much bigger and faster wheels, but I only have one. So now I have two options, either to keep playing 5-6 more levels, collect enough coins to buy the second one, or I can just watch an RV to make it here and now, which this is exactly the pressure point or selling points that we would like to create for users and what creates the real engagement with rewarded videos. So to summarize it, basically what we can see and what we can say that retention and playtime alone is not enough. It won't convert perfectly into LTV as we used to see with interstitial only monetization games, exactly because of the reason that APAPU or the combination between retention and playtime converts into the amount of interstitials we're going to show, and therefore for those type of games it will convert to LTV. But if we want to create RV and in-app purchases monetization, it won't. It will be much more harder to predict what will be the LTV. I took two examples of idle games we worked on recently. So on the left side we can see Money Hoop, and on the right side we can see Traffic Jam. Both amazing and fun games. Started with 50% day one retention, and basically what we can see is once we added monetization to the game, we showed double the amount of RV impressions for users in Traffic Jam comparing to Money Hoops. So we basically saw that we have 2 times higher ARPU day zero just because of that with the same in-game metrics. The reason for that and what we can learn from that is basically why we need to plan and why we need to have challenge in the game? Why do we need to test those selling points? And why do we need to balance the economy, the progression perfectly in order to create the right motivation for those games? Obviously, it's something that is crucial for idle game because it is hybrid subgenre. It is games that are monetized mainly with rewarded videos and in-app purchases and not interstitials. So for that type of game, the main benchmark, such as retention, playtime, and CPI, would also be the amount of RV impressions that users are watching in every day in the game. And this is the how big the effect on the LTV and the ARPU as a result of basically this RV engagement rate. Second thing, testing. So basically, this is something that you can find in the Supersonic dashboard from level analytics, fail rate, specific and special events, rewarded video, engagement rate, show rate, everything which is crucial in order to create the right experience and to get to the point that we are showing 2 times higher rewarded videos impressions. So it's something that we need to keep in mind and something that we need to monitor from day zero. From the first iteration, it's something that we need to monitor and to plan and to benchmark. So we won't work on the game for 3-6 months, and then we'll get to the point that we understand that the RV engagement rate is not good enough because of a weak economy system or not enough selling points that we planned in advance, and then we need to drop the game or change the game completely, which is not so efficient. So this is something that you can find already in the Supersonic dashboard, and obviously we'll share a benchmark for each type of game genre, etc. As I said, when we're approaching those type of games, hybrid games, or even classic hyper-casual games, which we want to create deeper experience and higher LTV, we need to keep in mind that RV engagement rate is as important as CPI, playtime, and retention, and it's something that should be one of the top benchmarks we're looking for when we're working on any type of a hyper-casual and hybrid game. So this slide is super important to me that you remember. If we're talking about the publishing funnel for those type of games, for hybrid games or for games that we are monetizing mainly with rewarded videos and in-app purchases, so on the bottom of the screen we can see the classic hyper-casual game flow. And the main change between the hyper-casual and the hybrid casual is that once we're moving to iteration, we already want to start and test and monitor the rewarded video engagement rate. And then we're moving to iterate. Usually those games are, it takes longer to develop and to optimize. But the main change and the main difference between the hyper-casual flow is that we're adding already in the iteration phase rewarded videos, and then we're moving to iteration, soft launch as the classic funnel. Key takeaways. So we need to remember that the hyper-casual industry were always volatile and changing quite quickly. And also we, the publishers and the game developers, we need to adjust quickly and do it together. So this is something that I highly recommend to play hybrid games, to play classic hyper-casual games that still topping the charts, and understand exactly why and what did the game developer change in the game to deal with the new changes that we're seeing. The second thing is that it's important to remember that it's still possible, and we can still see many nice hyper-casual games that have a lot of potential and doing great profits for the publisher and for the game developers. It's just harder to find them, and when we're finding them, we need to approach them a bit differently than we used to. In order to boost LTV, the main aspect and the main way that we're seeing is to create deeper experience, plan it in advance when we're ideating the game, making sure that the monetization strategy fit for the game loop and for the game genre before we even start to develop the game. And keep in mind the three main elements in the ideation phase, in the testing phase, and benchmarking. As your publishing manager, make sure you know what's your goals and what's your benchmarks in order to make sure that you're on the right track to get a profitable and successful game. Thank you very much. Now we're going to move to a Q&A.